under the conditions that we're under. And so, as Brent mentioned, I'm in North Platte at the research station there at West Central. Talk a little bit about nutritional management pre and post calving, getting some body condition scoring as well later in this presentation or throughout the presentation. So as a nutritionist, when a producer calls me and wants to build a ration or look at a nutritional program, there's a few things I want to know about their program to help build that nutritional program. Is one is understanding animal nutritional requirements, and this is really big. And so we'll go over this a little bit more, but that's a big one, is understanding where is the key requirements, where are they increasing and where are they decreasing. If I don't understand that, I can run into some big troubles. Know where that stress periods are that can result in some nutrient deficiencies. So it's a combination, not only those requirements, is what's my forage quality or supply, whether it's forage or your harvested hay or your feedstuffs quality during those nutritional requirement time points. And so we do have periods of high and low nutritional demands. I like to utilize that forage base as much as possible, and then supplement nutritional shortages after that. So one big key thing we talk about a lot, we push a lot, is monitoring nutrient status. And that's body condition score. Is your body condition score, your cows tells us your nutrient status before coming into that point. Where's it right here? Okay, sorry. And so I like to wander around a little bit, so I'll try to focus right here. But so body weight and body condition score really tells you that nutrient status is the direction that they're going. And so that direction tells you a whole lot about your nutrients or the nutrients that they've been on. And so if I've got cows at a low body condition score or they're thin, that tells me a lot about the nutrients they've been on. And so that direction is extremely important. We think about going into a breeding season. Direction of body weight change is a key driver of reproductive efficiency. In case we talked about earlier of estrus synchronization and some reproductive factors in that direction really influences that ability. If you're synchronizing cows, that really influences the ability of that cow to actually synchronize and get her pregnant on that timed AA. So a few different times that we really want to focus on monitoring that status is, one is late summer. And the reason why late summer is very important is that it tells me a lot of what I need to do to prepare for the winter. And so if it's about September time, I need to go through those cows and look at where's my cows at. What direction are they headed? And what direction is the forage quality or my feed stuff at that point? So if you think about, and I use this for example, a few years ago when we had that drought in 2018, and we had a lot of thin cows across the state. A lot of guys should have used that September time point because their forage quality was so low as when should I wean? And especially in western Nebraska, a lot of guys wean in December, in November. Those guys should have been weaning in September because their cows were already in thin body conditions for at that point in September that it really took away any advantage of trying to get any conditions for them before that winter hit. You think about the winter we had March in 2019. So we went that drought in 2018, and then we had that really wet, cold winter in 2018. Those cows didn't have a chance to recover and put on conditions for at that point. So that's why that late summer is very important. At weaning is another point that we want to focus on putting conditions for or making sure those cows are in good condition and making sure our management strategy is good around that weaning time. That start and third trimester, and these could be different, they could be the same. And so the start and third trimester drop 90 days before calving starts. And so some guys weaning is actually after that point. Some guys weaning is 30 days before that point. But that's your last chance to economically put on conditions for on a cow. Because once we get out to that point, requirements start increasing. And then we get to calving and she's lactating and requirements really increase at that point. And then the last point is at calving. So this is just an example of energy requirements of a 1,200-pound cow that milks at peak lactation 23 pounds of milk per day. And so in the United States, there's getting less and less 1,200-pound cows, and there's very few 23-pound milk cows in the U.S. due to some selection for increased milk. But this is just an example of where our requirements are across the months of the year. So if we calve here, our peak requirement is about 60 days after calving. It's about 60 days is at peak lactation. That's our highest requirement. What else is going to happen right after 60 days after calving? We're moving closer and closer to breeding season, right? And so our highest requirements for that cow is stacked right on top of the start of breeding season, or trying to get them prepared for breeding season. That's why nutrient, or knowing our nutrient status, is very important, because of that requirement moving into that breeding season. At weaning time is our lowest. We pull that calf off of that cow, she stops milking. So she may be milking 5 pounds at that point. All of a sudden, all those nutrients that's going to milk now can go back to her body and put on body weight. And then we move into this late trimester time point out here, nutrients are increasing. So our two highest points of nutrient or requirements is peak lactation. Lactation is a massive driver of requirements. And the other time is late lactation or late gestation. And so that's really important to think about. We'll cover a little bit about this. That's really important about supplying the nutrients not only for the cow, but also for that developing fetus. And so we've got to meet requirements for that cow. We also have to meet requirements of that growing fetus. So we're supporting a healthy fetus that can be productive after calving. So I like to focus on these two areas because of how key they are to production. Is that late gestation time point, 60, 90 days before calving, and early lactation, 50 to 100 days. Peak requirements at 60, we're moving right into that breeding season. So this is why those two periods are very important in our management, our nutritional management program. So when I think about nutritional management, I think about if a supplement will change animal performance in the future, I'm going to think about supplementing. And so there's a lot of times in the year that nutrient requirements may not be met by our forage supply. That may be okay. We can get by with some of that, but there's some key times that a supplement could have a big impact on the future. I'll show you the reason why later. But I also want to look at key performance responses when I supplement. I don't want to supplement something just to supplement something. I want to target key performance responses. And some of these are, like Casey talked about, some estrus responses. Can I get cows cycling earlier? What I feed can influence their ability to recover after calving and start cycling. The earlier I can get them to cycle, the earlier I can get them pregnant. And then you can run into some longevity increases, or even just increasing weaning weights the following year because she got bred earlier. Pregnancy rates, and then calf weaning rates or weight, and some of that could be due to some fetal programming. So Ward Labs kind of talked about knowing your forages, and this is very important from an aspect of, I got a producer calls me and he doesn't know his forage, what his forage quality is, what we're feeding. And so there's a lot of unknowns there, and you can be way off with what you think your forages are. I've got a lot of guys call me to say, their hay is the same hay they've been feeding for a year, and it's usually this. But I ask them to run a forage analysis, and it comes back totally different from what they think that forage is. And so, with any decision, knowledge is power. Without that knowledge, I can't make good, wise decisions about how to supplement these cows. I can run in situations where I am maybe overfeeding something because I think it's lower quality, or underfeeding something because I think it's higher quality. And so it really pays to know what that forage is. So the ultimate measure of that forage quality is actually animal performance. Animal performance is the driver of that equation. If I have low animal performance, I need to go back to my feedstuffs. My feedstuffs may not be adequate for the animals I have. And that could be a result of maybe some lower quality feedstuff, could be a result of genetic selection. I'm selecting for animals that don't fit. And we can go with animal performance is determined by availability, intake, etc. But really at the end of the day, our forage quality or the feed stuff we have is going to be a big driver of our animal responses. So this is just an example of yearly variation in forage quality. And this is some of our data from Goodmanson. And I took the average forage quality in June, July, September, and October. Then I compared it to the drought we had in 2002, and then that wet year in 2018. And so there's something really interesting. I get a lot of calls on this of when guys think that, we had a really wet year, we had a lot of forage growth, it was a good year. But then their weaning weights of their calves were 25, 50 pounds lighter. And they'll wonder what went wrong. And this is really what went wrong here is. So in June in Sand Hills, our forage quality is, an average year is 12, and that drought year in 2002 is 12.7, and that wet year is 10. Why in that wet year was it lower forage quality in June? Think about high growth of forages, it matures faster, right? If a plant matures faster, it goes lower quality much sooner. If a plant matures slower, it stays immature and quality is there longer. And so in these high rainfall years, we can have some low quality forages. The offset from a drought year is what? I've got more of it. So it's a give and take. I have to realize that my forage could be much lower quality in that wet year versus a dry year. In July, we're at 11. In that drought year, 8.2, 7.5. And so this is why we have a lot of thin cows across Nebraska, is that in a normal year, we're out 11. In that year that we had a lot of rainfall, we're at 7. So our forage in July looked like September, October forage. This is why I'd say it's important to body conditions for cows in that late summer time point to tell me where they are. That helps making that decision about how to manage those cows before we get into the winter time frame. Then get out to October, we're about the same across the board. And so knowing this helps me dictate my nutritional program or my strategy with these cows. The other component with that is knowing that requirement of, in this slide we have cows, this is a mid-third of gestation, that last trimester. A cow that milks 10 pounds at peak lactation, a cow milks 20 pounds at peak lactation. And so there was a lot of low preg rates in 2018. There's a lot of low preg rates in 2019 due to the drought we had that had low quality forages again. And the reason behind that is as forage quality declines, their ability to eat enough or consume enough of it declines as well. And so if we have a 1,200 pound cow that's going to eat, let's say 2% of their body weight on a dry matter basis, that cow's probably going to eat somewhere around 24 pounds on a dry matter basis of that hay. If we're in a low quality state, let's say with this 20 pound cow during peak lactation, if it's 8% crude protein forage, she's at 30 pounds of forage to meet her requirement. She can only eat 25 pounds. So 5 pounds is the difference there that she's not going to get to meet her requirements. So she's going to be short on requirements due to that forage quality. If we drop down to 4%, she's got to eat 60 pounds of forage to meet her requirements. This is why it's very important to know your forage quality. So in that winter, I guess it was the spring of 2018 or 19, I guess, guys were telling me they kept on increasing their hay, feeding more and more hay, but they had downer cow issues. Why did they have downer cow issues? They were feeding a lower quality forage. Those cows just couldn't eat enough of it. There was not enough energy in that forage to meet those requirements. So knowing that forage or that hay stuff is very important. So let's quickly look at some late gestation management. So one big important thing about late gestation is we're not just feeding the cow, we're feeding that future calf as well. So we've got two things going on there. One, we're preparing that cow through the winter, preparing her to calve and to get rebred. We're also feeding that calf. And that's important from the aspect of that calf is where we make money at, right? And so if I'm underfeeding that cow during that time frame, I can influence the growth rate and the health of that calf. That can influence my profitability. And so that's very important to not short that cow during that time point and influence that fetus. And so we know from previous data from back in even the 1980s that calves may experience a reduced passive immunity by the nutrient flow to them during late gestation. And so there's a lot of feeders back in 2019 that did not want to buy calves for Nebraska because of our winter. They were afraid of health issues. And it goes back to this right here is that if I insult or have a negative influence on their nutrient intake of that fetus during late gestation, I can cause long-term health issues on that calf. And that's just not after they're born, that's actually throughout their life, they can have some negative health issues. And so that's a really important thing about your nutritional program during late gestation is not shorting that calf. And so we can utilize, if we're very strategic at the same time, we can utilize fat reserves as a supplement. And a lot of guys do that, especially in Western Nebraska, but you have to be very strategic about how you do that. And it's a fine line. And it's a very fine line to ride. And you can easily get so far behind with it that you can have a big negative response on performance. But there's a lot of guys that do use some body weight loss as a strategy because you're using that fat as an energy supplement off the cow. If you think about energy needs, cattle energy needs for maintenance increases about 1% each degree below 32 degrees. You know, think how cold it is today. Think of all the snow that we've got this last week. And each degree below 32 degrees, we're increasing those requirements for maintenance to maintain their body by 1%. In wet weather, the calculation is similar, but we start at 59 degrees Fahrenheit. And then it starts increasing 2% at that point. This is why we had so much trouble last year or year before last because of how wet and cold it was in March or February and March. So at 59 degrees, when it's wet, that increases 2%. So the coldest I've ever been in my life was not in Miles City, Montana, and negative 40 degree temp. It was actually in Tennessee with 30 degree temps, but it was just wet. Wet changes our ability to actually adapt to cold. Cattle are the same way. If it's wet, they have a harder time adapting to that cold because of their body being wet. So intake of low quality hay. So a lot of guys think if I got low quality hay, I'm just going to add corn to it. But corn is the solution to low quality, and it's not. A lot of guys run into trouble when they just want to come in because corn is an energy supplement. It has a lot of energy to it. But under a low quality situation with low quality hay, I can run into or I can increase the issue I'm having by feeding corn. And this is why. So this is an older study from 1987 that looked at feeding this lower quality hay that was less than 6% crude protein, fed either 2.2 or 0, 2.2, 4.4, or 6.6 pounds of corn per day. You see what it does to hay intake. And so roughly, if I fed 3 pounds of corn, I'm replacing 3 pounds of hay. So we have a nice substitution. If we're in a drought and I need to decrease forage intake to stretch my forage reserves, corn works great for that. But if I'm on a low quality situation, corn may not work the best in that scenario if I'm not meeting their protein needs. If we look at energy intake, 0 to 2, we actually get an increase in energy intake. But after that, we start decreasing energy intake because of forage intake decreases. That replacement is not enough at the rate that they're decreasing that forage intake. And so intake decreases and we don't meet those energy requirements. And I'll show you a slide next that shows that body weight can decrease in this scenario by feeding corn with low quality forages. So if I'm going to increase energy intake and I'm on a low quality forage feed, one, I need to meet those protein requirements first, and then I can come in with a energy supplement on top of that to help. You know, in Nebraska, we are blessed with distillers. One is a high energy feed, it's a high protein feed. And so distillers will not decrease intake like corn will. And so actually feeding 2 pounds of distillers will have much higher energy intake than feeding 2 pounds of corn because of no replacement or decrease in that forage. And you actually have an increase in forage intake by feeding that distillers because of the protein. So we think about principles of protein supplementation. With protein though, outside of corn, where corn decrease intake, protein will decrease digestibility at low quality forage. It increases forage intake because we've got a gut feel issue at that point, right? If it's lower quality, they can only eat so much. It stays in the rumen longer. And by feeding protein, now we're feeding those microbes, those bugs within the rumen, allows them to digest that hay or that forage, and forage intake increases. And therefore energy intake is going to increase as well. So feeding a protein supplement with low quality forages actually increases energy intake as well. So this is another older study that was done in Western Nebraska in the 80s that looked at energy intake of steers consuming a low quality is 5.2% crude protein with adding soybean meal to their diet. So no supplement or getting soybean meal fed. About 1.5 pounds of soybean meal was fed to these steers. We look at the really big important thing here is we look at no supplement. They're eating, these steers are eating 10 pounds, almost 11 pounds of that forage. By increase or feeding that soybean meal, look where we're at with intake. We went from 10 pounds of that forage per day, those steers, to 18.7 pounds of forage by feeding almost 2 pounds of soybean meal. That's a huge increase in forage intake by meeting their protein needs and meeting the microbes needs. And so going back to that last slide, I increased digestibility, I increased forage intake of that low quality forage. And so this is the TDN intake of that forage. So we went from 4.27 to 9.88. And so almost double the energy intake just by feeding a protein supplement. We went back to that previous slide with corn. We went the opposite direction by feeding over 2 pounds of corn. So it's very important that our first response to lower quality situation or having low quality supplements that we just don't go to corn. We've got to first meet these protein requirements before adding in a starch-based supplement. Here's a pretty similar study that was done in Western Nebraska in the 1990s. They fed late gestation cows on a low quality situation, ear corn plus a protein or just protein. And so this is their body weights coming into the study during late gestation. No difference. Cows that were fed air corn lost over 100 pounds during late gestation. Goes back to that one slide of energy intake and forage intake. I fed corn to a low quality situation. I'm decreasing forage intake. I'm decreasing overall energy intake. And so we're going backwards with the idea that I'm increasing energy intake with corn. Air corn plus protein lost -40. Protein itself actually gained 13 pounds. The difference here is since these cows lost so much here and -40 as well, that once they hit higher quality forages, they rebounded. And so that playing a directory after that point, and this is why I said some guys use body weight loss as a strategy. So if you do it right, is this plane of gain during the breeding season could be beneficial if you can utilize it right. But overall, feeding air corn from the winter supplementation study they lost negative 17 pounds overall. And so by adding corn just to a diet of low quality forages, we can go backwards. And so that's an important thing to note when you're thinking about supplementation strategies. This is a study that's done here at Goodmanson back in the early 2000s that looked at feeding 1 pound per day of a distiller-based supplement. So something around 30% crude protein. And so in December, started supplementing these March calving cows. This is what happened to body condition score during late gestation of not supplementing cows. Is that supplement cows, both started about 5.2, 5.4, and by calving in mid-March, there's nearly a full body condition score difference. And so think of this as one, adding that small amount of protein, one, it benefits from a energy intake, a forage intake side of it, but it also helps maintain that body condition score. So in a lot of ways, it's an insurance policy. That I have enough body condition score on those cows to go through that time period. These cows that didn't get supplement did rebound, but your forage supply or energy intake has to be high after that point to rebound. So if I moved into a drought after this, or a low quality situation, I could be in trouble with that scenario. And so making sure your energy intake is high after calving is very important if you have these cows in this lower body condition score. If we look at pregnancy rates, basically the same pregnancy rates across that, and the reason behind it is the rate of gain during breeding right here versus the other one. And so if my nutrient intake is high enough right before breeding or going to that breeding, that plain nutrition is very high, my pregnancy rates will not be declined or decreased by having thin cows. This is about 15 years of data from Goodmanson of late gestation supplementation. And so this was in a beef report last year, the 2020 beef reports last year. And so cows were either non-supplemented 1 pound per day over late gestation or 2 pounds per day. And this was off the heifer side of it, is that feeding 1 pound of supplement increased weaning weights of those calves or those heifer calves. And so 1 pound of protein, of that 32% crude protein distiller-based supplement, increased weaning weights of those calves. So it goes back to that concept of if I starve that calf or starve that cow or short that cow during late gestation, I can impact that growth and that development of that subsequent calf. If we look at other measurements after weaning, no difference across the board on the reproductive performance of those heifers. But we do see that increase in weaning weights by those calves that their dams got supplement over winter. Steers, same thing. We nearly get about a 10-pound increase by every pound that we fed in the study. And so up to 2 pounds per day, that supplement increased steer weaning weight the highest. Looking at when those steers went to the feedlot, no difference in live weight, no difference in hot carcass weight. There are some differences in marbling though. And so what I do to that cow today, or doing right now to that cow, can influence productivity of that future calf that she has. So it's very important to think about that in your nutritional plans. Another thing we need to think about is protein type. And so not all proteins are equal. Just because I'm feeding, let's say, a urea-based supplement that's 30% or 25% crude protein doesn't make it equal to a distiller-based supplement that's the same protein. Not all proteins will have the same benefit or effect on performance. This was a study from Montana State in the 80s, late 80s, that had 2 different winters. They had a mild winter and really harsh, wet winter. And they had the no supplement group. They had a group that got fed a high rumen degradable protein source. So think about this as a group that got fed alfalfa hay or cottonseed meal supplement. So rumen degradable protein is a protein that's going to be degraded by the rumen microbes. And those microbes are going to repackage that and send a different profile of amino acids to the cow. The other group is a rumen undegradable source that's high in protein that was rumen undegradable. And so that would be protein that bypasses degradation of the microbes, that the cow actually gets those amino acids as it was fed. And so this distillers is a high rumen undegradable protein source. And then you can get in corn gluten meal as well. And some of our animal byproducts, feather meal, blood meal, fish meal, are all high in undegradable protein sources. But in this study, the first year with the mild winter, no difference where the no supplements pretty much maintained body weight. Protein sources were the same, but in that harsh winter, protein sources really influenced the ability to maintain cow body weight. By feeding that degradable protein source, they lost more body weight than the undegradable source. And so the type of protein we're feeding can really influence that performance. So don't think that all proteins, just because it's 30% protein, doesn't make it equal. And so how the microbes or how that rumen degrades in the type of protein that cow gets is very important on their performance. This was a study done at here in Western Nebraska with Trey Patterson's PhD research that fed cows, or these first calf heifers, either a high rumen undegradable source during late gestation or a rumen degradable protein source during late gestation. And this is their subsequent preg rates. And so this is the concept one said, if I can feed something now that could have an impact on performance later, I would highly consider it. Type of protein that I fed over winter influenced their pregnancy rates that following summer, going from 86% to 91%. And so the amount of protein was exactly the same. The type of protein was totally different. And so protein sources matter when we think about animal performance due to how the rumen and the microbes handle those proteins. This is a late gestation study of mine when I was at New Mexico State as a grad student that fed either 2 pounds per day of a cottonseed meal supplement. So think about a high rumen degradable supplement, a 1/4 pound per day of a rumen undegradable supplement, or no supplement at all. So during late gestation, 2 pounds, they gain 12 pounds of body weight. This 1/4 pound of a high bypass rumen undegradable, gain 4 pounds, no supplement loss, 30 pounds. No difference in pregnancy rates across the board, but what we did find is on the subsequent steer side in the feedlot. No difference in weaning body weight, no difference in initial and final body weight, steer performance, but what we did find was a health issue. That feeding that bypass or that rumen undegradable protein source during late gestation increased the health status of those calves when they went to the feedlot. The type of protein we're feeding can really influence not only that cow, but that subsequent calf, because the type of amino acids or the amino acids that cow actually gets to utilize. So quickly, let's look at some management after calving. So we think about the cow herd. So a profitable cow-calf operation should have a high percentage of calf crop each year. So we get in that 90 percentile. It's really tough to move outside of that 90 percentile of pregnancy rates because of the cost. It gets very expensive to make any movement there. We can make a lot easier movements when we're in the 80s to move up. But once we get into the 90s, it's very tough to increase or change that pregnancy rate without being not being cost effective. So with gestation being 280 days, we need cows to recover, and rebreeding should occur somewhere between 80 and 85 days. Think about that calving interval. Maintaining a yearly calving interval, I need cows bred within 90 days after calving. This could be a major problem. This is a major problem with young females, of those 2 and 3-year-old females that have a hard time recovering from calving, have a hard time to start cycling early enough after calving to maintain this yearly calving interval. And that's why they fall out of the herd so quickly, is that they just don't have enough time and not ready to start cycling early enough to maintain this. So one thing I really like to do or like to see is I want cows gaining body weights prior to breeding. And so that direction, no matter how thin they are, no matter what their body condition score, I want cows gaining body weight. And so that direction of gaining body weight is very important on their ability to conceive and that timing of conceiving. The problem is it's very economically challenging to increase body weight during lactation. I showed y'all that requirement slide of what's their nutrient requirements at early lactation. This is their maintenance requirements of a 1,200 pound cow with 20 pounds of milk. So during late gestation, to meet her requirements, she needs to consume on a dry matter basis 1.9 pounds of crude protein per day. Of TDN, it's 12.9 pounds per day. As soon as she calves and starts getting into lactation, we go up to 2.8 and 16 pounds. That's why it's very tough to economically put on body weight after calving. The other thing is nutrients are prioritized to lactation before they up to her body. And so as she's consuming something, those nutrients will go to lactation to support her lactational requirements well before it will go to gain any body weight or a reproductive response at all. And so, we can talk about nutrient requirements or genetic selection or increased milk and what it does in this scenario of it's counterproductive of our ability to actually gain body weight because she's got to meet that lactational requirement before she can meet any other requirement. So this is just a schematic of requirements of if I'm increasing milk production from 10 pounds at peak, 18, 22, and 30, what it does to energy requirements. And so this is peak lactation about 8 to 9 weeks out of calving and what it does to those energy requirements. So we're going into breeding season here. If I'm selecting for more and more milk in my herd, I'm selecting or could be selecting against her ability to actually conceive or be productive within my environment because of this. It's going to take a lot more nutrients to support that cow and support lactation. And I may not have those nutrients in my environment to support this increase. And so on average today, we have cows milking more and a higher quality milk than a Holstein cow did in the late 1970s due to genetic selection. And so on average, we're up in this 22, 30 plus. I milked a cow, we had some studies in Tennessee that we milked cows that had cows milking 40 pounds of milk. Those requirements, as I'm increasing that selection, really is going to be driving that ability of that cow to actually recover and be productive within our environments. This is just a schematic what I just talked about of prioritizing nutrients. So the first place is body maintenance, and that's just to maintain our bodies. That's just body function. And so that's the first place those nutrients will go. The next is reproduction, and that's not to get pregnant. That is to maintain a pregnancy. The next place would be lactation. And so she's got to meet these lactation requirements. Go back to the last slide. If I have high lactation requirements within my environment, that's a lot of nutrients coming here. And finally, after she meets lactation requirements, it goes to estrous cycles. It goes to establishing a pregnancy or getting pregnant or any body weight change or increasing body weight. So understanding that schematic of what lactation does to nutrient requirements is very important. Here's the challenge from a postpartum interval is I talked about we need cows to start cycling, get bred by day 90. If we look at by age, this is the older data from Wiltbank in 1970, and it holds fairly true that postpartum interval, so that time frame from calving to start cycling, in a young cow, a 2-year-old cow, on average, it's 92 days. I need that cow to get pregnant by day 90. On average, they're cycling 92 days. That's why it's very tough, or that's why pregnancy rates in young females are so low or lower, is because of this right here. They're cycling later, and she may get pregnant within that, whatever breeding season length that is, but she calves later the following year. and she needs more time to recover from that, and she got shorted. And so she has less time to recover the following year, and so she falls out maybe as a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old because the timing of pregnancy here. As a 3-year-old, that's declined, and we get out to mature cows, that really stabilizes where those cows have should have ample enough time to recover from calving to start cycling in. And so postpartum interval is not the area that's causing issues in reproduction as it is with mature cows, as it is with young females. So postpartum rate of gain and reproduction are highly connected. And this is why I said I want cows gaining body weight as soon as possible after calving. This is a study that looked at 2 rates of gain, 1 pound per day gain or 2 pounds per day gain during that breeding season. And so the first 20 days of breeding season, by 1 pound a day gain, they had just short of 30% pregnant cows. Gaining 2 pounds, they're nearly up to 50%. That's a 20 percentage point increase by the rate of gain. By day 40, we're about 60 and 80. By day 60, we're 70 and nearly 90. This is what rate of gain, and why rate of gain is so important of getting cows pregnant, is the sooner and more I can get them gain after that point, especially through that breeding season, the earlier I can get them pregnant. And that's very important, especially younger females. This is some older study from actually Wilt Bank again that looked at a prepartum nutrition, so late gestation nutrition of low versus a maintenance level, postpartum nutrition of low or a high postpartum nutrition level. We looked at postpartum interval. At a low, they're at 73 days. If I go to low high, I'm at 54 days. So go back to that one slide I showed body condition score with getting a protein supplement or not, how pregnancy rates were not different was caused by that rate of change during breeding season. It's because of this. If I have the nutrients during that postpartum was high enough, I can outdo or overdo that low prepartum nutrition level and get cows cycling early enough to get pregnant and have high pregnancy rates. Maintenance low and maintenance high were exactly the same. And so just because my cows are thin at calving doesn't mean I'm going to have low pregnancy rates. I just got to have the nutrients there to recover from that. So this is your standard body condition score that you see in any trade article or popular press, is that, you know, at calving body condition score, mature cows at 4, they were at 60% pregnancy rates, at 5, 78, and body condition score 6 at 91%. And this is the standard that you see that we need cows in body condition score 6. There's so some issues with this, and we can go in detail about that later, but within that, they found that percent cycling within day 80, and that day 80 is important, right? We just talked about getting cows pregnant by day 90. 62% of 4 or less, 88% 5 or 5, and then 98% in the body condition score 6. So this is the standard that we need cows to be in body condition score 6 at calving for adequate reproductive performance. And we'll go more in detail of that. I thought I had another slide here, but I think we have more later. From a supplementation side, this is a big one that I talk about, is using ionophores in diets. And so ionophore could be Rumensin, could be Bovatec. This is 5 different studies that looked at postpartum interval in mature cows by adding an ionophore compared to a control. And so the smaller postpartum interval day is, the earlier they're cycling and recover from calving. On average, by adding an ionophore, which is a small amount, we decrease that postpartum interval by 18 days. The 18 days is a big response by adding a small amount. And so that's a very effective change that has a long-term impact. And so adding an ionophore can really impact some postpartum interval. Let's quickly go over, due to sake of time, body condition scoring in cows. And so when you think of body condition scoring, one, body condition scoring is more than fat tissue. And we think a lot about body condition score as fat cover. And there's a lot more to it than just fat. It's also lean tissue. especially with older females, you see a lot more lean tissue loss than you do with fat tissue. And so it's the combination of fat tissue and protein tissue. Personally, I can get by with more lean or fat tissue loss. If I start losing lean tissue, I know we're in trouble. And so lean tissue has problems. The first place a lactating cow will start mobilizing lean tissue is their liver. Their liver triples in size during lactation, and they'll start mobilizing lean tissue stores at their liver if they're short on protein. And so think about their liver as their engine for metabolism. And if their engine is smaller, their ability to provide the nutrients for those requirements declines. And so that's why protein tissue is important not to mobilize it. So why is body condition score important? There's a close relationship between body condition score at calving in the first 90 days after calving to reproductive success and calf immune system. And I've talked about this slightly earlier. So the current body condition score is a result of, it's a balance of the recent nutrient supply and the recent nutrient requirements. So it's a direction. It's a direction of, I know my requirements, I know where I'm headed, what's my nutrients are headed, and that's going to tell me what that balance is. So if I've got thin cows, I know there's a mismatch there. Either my requirements at that time before that were too high for the forage quality, causing that cow to be thin. If I have a bunch of body condition score 6, 7, 8 cows, I know it's the opposite. I know that my nutrient supply is much higher than my requirements, and I'm overfeeding those cows. It's also a product of management. Could be a grazing management, could be a supplementation program. And it could be a timing of calving. You know, in Nebraska and in other places, we have several different timing of calving. You know, it's just not spring calving or summer calving. There's a bunch of fall calving situations as well that could influence body condition score. Could be a mismatch of a genetic potential. We talked about milk. Milk is one of the biggest drivers of why we have thin cows across the state. Is I've selected for increased selection of increased milk. My environment can't handle increased milk. And so those requirements, meeting those requirements has to come somewhere. That usually comes off the body of that cow if I don't supplement those requirements. So this is the body condition score system. Does anyone in here use the body condition score system with their cows? No one? A few of y'all? Let's just make this simple. Who cares about 1 through 9? That's too hard, right? You got thin, you got adequate, and you got fat cows. You don't have to make body condition score this 1 through 9 system that you go through there and make it difficult. You can make it much simpler on yourself by realizing I've got thin cows. What's the direction I'm headed? And what do I need to change to offset that? I've got my cows are in good condition, or my cows are in a fat condition in the direction I'm headed. Because sometimes a fat condition is not a good thing. If I'm in an over-conditioned cow going into a situation where, let's say, if I'm a purebred breeder and I'm calving right now in January, a cow that's in body condition score 6 or 7 may be in trouble. Because her requirements at a 6 or 7 is much higher than a cow that's at 4 or 5. And so requirements increase as body condition score increase. Fatter the cow is, the higher her requirements is going to be. That's one reason why we see those cows that are thin compensating and have increased average daily gain or growth or body weight during those time points where their counterparts at a heavier or better body condition score is not. So one thing to note is to move a body condition score, I need to add about 70, 80 pounds. So if I got thin cows and I need to move them up to a better body condition score, I've got to at least move them up 70 to roughly 100 pounds. Now during late gestation, that changes. And why does that change? Because of fetal growth. And so with fetal growth, I got to add another 100 pounds to that because I've got now that fetus that's growing, that placental weight that's increasing, and so I've got to feed those as well. So if I've got a body condition score 4 cow, and I want to get to a 5 during that time point, that's 170 pounds that cow needs a day to get to a body condition score 5. Now, during lactation or any time outside of that late gestation, if I need to increase the body condition score, that's just 70, 80 pounds. So this is some pictures that Rick Rasby took of, we've got a few guides on body condition score, and Brent, I should have brought them with me today, but this is the same cow. And the reason why this is good, because it's the same cow. It's hard to get, because the body condition score 4, all cows do not look exactly the same. And I'll cover why that is, but having the same cow in these 3 different body condition scores really helps your eye of seeing what's those body condition score. In body condition score 4, we see those last 3 ribs, or 4 ribs right here. When she moves up to 5, she looks a little more flush. You still see a couple of ribs here. Look at her top line, it is a lot more flush. She's not so tight on her hind legs between her hooks and her pins. And then up to 6, she's much more rounded. And so one thing to note is cows will lose body weight at different points. I may have some cows that lose body weight fat on the rib cover, but less on their top line. And some of that could be age of cow. We see a lot of older cows that lose that loin area. They'll lose that protein tissue, but they have a lot of fat cover on their ribs. So it's very important to note that cows lose and gain body weight differently. So in body condition scoring cows, your eyes need to be calibrated with palpating. If you're going through and actually body condition scoring using a 1 through 9 system, I've got to do it with my hand. I've got to calibrate my eyes with my hand. And there's been plenty of data showing that going out to a pasture and body condition scoring cows without calibrating your eyes to that, you could be way off. And so you need to calibrate your eyes to your hand. Cull cows, another thing, cull cows are better condition score than they actually are. And a lot of reasons, if you think about winter, we have hair coat. We've got to see through that hair coat. So if I'm going out to body condition score cows and I don't look through that hair coat, I can actually think they're in better condition score than they truly are. So that happens a lot. Gut feel is another one. If I'm on a low quality forage situation and these cows have been tanked up on hay, they've got this big gut capacity, and some guys let that distract them from the true body condition score of that cows. Sometimes we call cows in worse condition they are after a winter storm. So we just had the storm here. If you didn't have hay out in front of them or some kind of break out front of them, those cows will be sucked up. One would be lack of water intake, lack of feed intake. So if I sport them after that storm, they're going to look thinner than they truly are. Give them a couple of days and they're back to that body condition score before, because of just replenishing what was utilized from their body during that storm. So what if I got thin cows at weaning? So at weaning to 90 days prior calving is really our best window to increase body weight and body conditions for cows. And the reason why is we've got decreased nutrient requirements. So we wean that calf off. She's not lactating anymore. That's our lowest requirement time point. And it's really driven by lactation. We get after 90 days, we get into that late gestation time point. This is our last chance to increase body condition score economically. And so we start getting in a increased nutrient requirement, which is driven by fetal growth. The other issue we're going to run into is winter storms. Winter storms change requirements. And so if we have elongated periods of winter storm and wet weather, that really increases their requirements. And it makes it tougher to increase their body weight or body condition score. And so this is pretty similar to that last slide earlier with protein supplementation, but this is a effective weaning date on cow body condition score, where we wean cows either in September or cows got weaned at 1st of November. So weaning date can be utilized as a supplement strategy if you can handle those calves or manage those calves aside from their cows. And so wean cows, these cows in September and 1st of November, look at body condition score throughout the winter. Basically a full body condition score difference. So I talked about that summer of 2018 of low quality forage situation of monitoring that status of body condition score in September. This is why it's very important. If I weaned when I normally weaned, I could be way behind the ball. So weaning date should be flexible, and also it could be used as a supplement strategy. That's the same slide as earlier with protein supplementation increasing or managing, maintaining body condition score during late gestation. This is a older study from Montana, from eastern of Montana. It looked at average weaning date and supplement effects on cow body condition score for September and December. So they wean cows either in September or December here, or the cows that they wean, very similar to what I just showed you. The cows that they weaned in September, during that time frame, gained 0.3 of a body condition score. Those still lactating lost nearly a full body condition score. And so weaning, that effect, even though they're only probably milking or producing about 5 pounds of milk, still has a big influence on that condition score. No supplement versus supplement in that study. No supplement lost about 0.6. Supplement with a protein supplement gained about 0.2. Very similar results. You look at between early weaning or weaning at September versus supplementing. So it really depends on my ability to handle those calves. In our situation, if we have cheap distillers, this is a good option. If we're in a drought situation with forage supply may be limited, this is a better option of decreasing forage intake. I wean that calf off of that cow, I save about 10 pounds of forage per day, just due to decreasing lactation and taking that calf off. And so in a drought situation, we're here when we can have cheap distillers, I'm probably over here because of it's more cost effective managing those calves here for us out on pasture with their dams. So one consideration is sort thin and young cows off. I've got a lot of producers that run their 2s and 3-year-olds with mature cows, and they have pregnancy rates issues with their young females because for that is that young females can't compete with mature cows. There's some behavioral issues, they get pushed around, and there's a lot of data showing that if I manage 2s and 3-year-olds away from older cows, I see a pregnancy rate increase. So if I manage my young females away from mature cows, I can have a boost in pregnancy rates. I can also increase or be strategic about those thin cows. Think about body condition scoring across your herd. If I average 5, I'm going to have some 4s and I'll have some 6s. But it doesn't make any sense to feed all of them the same if I have some really thin cows and I need to pick up body weight. So sorting them off and feeding them separately may be a more cost-effective strategy. So what if my cows are thin at calving? I talked about passive immunity. If cows are thin during late gestation or nutrient supply is low during late gestation, I may have some passive immunity or health issues with those calves. This is some older data of IgG status of calves at 24 hours old by their dam's body condition score at calving. So as body condition score decreases from 6 to 2, IgG status of that calf decreases. That's going to influence that calf's ability throughout its life by that IgG status out here, especially in these 2 to 3 range. That gets closer to 4 to 5, but that nutrient flow to that cow during late gestation really influences that calf's health. Same slide I talked about earlier on body condition score. So this is a study of mine for New Mexico State that looked at body condition score at calving in 2s and 3-year-old cows. And the reason why this is different from other studies is how we manage them post-calving. And so body condition score 4, 5, and 6, resumption of estrus is 84, 82, and 80. Remember, getting cows pregnant by day 90 is very important. On an average, these cows are cycling around 82, 83 days. Pregnancy rates from a 4 to 6 was 92, 91, 90. The reason behind this is that how we manage cows post-calving. We've got to get cows gaining body weight as soon as possible. I can alleviate the issues of having thinner cows as long as the nutrient intake is high enough. This is a study from the 1960s that looked at body condition score prior to calving. They had two groups, 6.5 and a 4.4. Body condition score 90, body condition score 90 days after calving, they were same. So they had one group that were in a really good body condition score at calving. And this is what I mentioned about purebred guys calving now in too heavy of a condition score versus this thin condition score where they gained weight, they lost weight. And so nutrient intake was 8 pounds per day versus 16 pounds per day in the two groups. Look at pregnancy rates. So direction of body weight gain or body weight change is an important factor of driving reproductive performance. Even if they're in a good body condition score at calving, doesn't mean they're in a good shape. We run into a lot of issues with summer calving herds due to they calve in our peak or high quality situation and we turn our bulls out in August. Our forage quality in July really starts tanking. And so body condition score and body weight starts declining in these summer herds can really cause issues. If I'm over conditioned, I can run into these results here, even though they calved in a really good body condition score. And so body condition score is not really a big driver if I'm controlling that body weight change after the fact. And so from managing postpartum interval and getting cows pregnant as soon as possible, I really need cows gaining body weight as soon as possible. So breeding thin cows and body condition score are really not a challenge if I'm gaining body weight. I'd rather breed cows gaining body weight than losing body weight. Heifers rebreeding second calf should not be below a 5. We do have some challenges there because they're still trying to grow. Wean earlier if cows are thinner. Additional energy may be needed for thin cows, but that energy should not necessarily be dumping corn-tone. All right, we've got to meet those protein requirements before adding a starch-based supplement to it. Cold and winter increases energy requirements. So think about that in your nutritional plans, that when we have especially long stretches, not just 1 or 2 day events, long stretches of wet and cold, we may need to start thinking about our nutritional program. If you're continually playing catch up and always have a problem with body condition score, something's either wrong with your genetics, you're selecting for an animal that doesn't fit, you have a mismanagement of your management, or timing of calving doesn't fit. So we're always playing catch up. We've got an issue that we need to solve so we're not playing catch up the whole time. With that, Brad, if we have any times for questions, or this is my contact information, or I wait till later today.
Oh, I think we've got just a couple of minutes if we have questions for Travis. Anything from the group? If not, you will have an opportunity to visit with Travis, Kelsey, and the others, or Casey and the others during the panel discussion later today as well. Okay, nothing from the group. It doesn't appear. So we are scheduled. Travis, thank you. Yep. Great discussion on body condition scoring, the importance of that, and of course, why we need systems research. I think it was summarized very well. So now we're scheduled for lunch.